Well, hello everybody and welcome to this recording. It is my privilege to have with me today Dr. Susan Hillis, whose personal, ministry, professional and service commitments all intersect at the Globe and Orphans crossroads. Personally, she's an adoptive mother of 11 children. She and her husband Brian now have 10 grandchildren. We love their family. We appreciate having them as a part of our church here at Northlands for the past 20 years. Ministry-wise, Susan serves as the Senior Technical Advisor for the World Without Orphans Global Executive Team, and her aim there is primarily that the world's best evidence guides the programs and priorities of WWO. Professionally, Dr. Hillis serves as a Senior Technical Advisor for the Global Health at the CDC. Susan's research spans domestic and global regions and has led her to publishing over 130 peer-reviewed publications in high-impact medical journals, including The Lancet, where she recently published a paper on parenting in the time of COVID-19. Finally, as for her service commitment, Dr. Hillis is an active duty officer in the US Public Health Service and is currently deployed on the COVID-19 International Task Force. She received the highest non-combat medal, the Meritorious Service Medal for domestic and global contributions to strengthening public health. Susan, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Greg.
I would just like, for those who don't know you, for you to tell us a little about what you've learned. You've adopted many children, you're raising kids, and can you tell us something that you've learned in that process?
Sure, I would love to share with you a few things that I've learned. It's hard to get it down into 2 or 3 sentences, but I'll try. So one of the things that was really clear to us when we adopted is what would have happened to children if they didn't have safe and loving families. Yeah. And that's beyond the scope of this interview, but essentially the consequences are grave and influence really every aspect of life: health, development, spiritually, relationally, professionally, in every area. And what we've been able to see with the children that the Lord has given us, the 11, is that the Lord has interrupted those cycles of violence and abuse. And we can see in our 10 grandchildren what a wonderful job all of our children and their spouses are doing, raising their children in a healthy and safe and loving family. Yeah. We're thankful that the Lord has also brought all of our children into relationships with Him. And most of them are involved meaningfully in a church fellowship, and they have good relationships with us. So that's not to say that everything is rosy. Never is when you're in a family. And it is to say the Lord has impressed us with the biggest lesson of all, and that is unfailing love is unfailing. And really, it's His unfailing love that has been unfailing for us and for them. And we're so thankful that all of the trajectory of what could have happened has been interrupted by the Lord. So the same thing we've seen Him do in our family, we have evidence from science to show that those same things can happen in cities and in nations and in regions of the world. So we're really excited. I personally feel like it's a great privilege to walk forward with eyes of faith, believing what I've seen God do, like around this kitchen table that I'm sitting at today, He can do in the world.
Yeah. When we talk about violence against children, when we talk about helping orphans into families, when we talk about vulnerable children the world over, many people just throw up their hands and say, well, it's just too big an issue. We can't ever make a difference. And I think having you make a difference in those 11 children's lives and now in their 10 grandchildren and counting, and in hundreds of others that our church has touched, and we've seen the same interruption of those cycles. And it's the great passion of WWO, World Without Orphans, to just massively interrupt all those cycles the world over. I'm sure there's some people who are listening to us who've never heard of World Without Orphans. Can you tell us a little bit about what excites you about World Without Orphans?
Yes. So the thing that excites me most, honestly, is it was God's idea. So when people first hear the name, they're kind of taken aback, like, oh my goodness, this is impossible. What do you mean, World Without Orphans? But as believers, we're told nothing is impossible with God. We even know people that have cut the word impossible out of their dictionary, because if it's not going to be in God's, then why should it be in ours? Yeah. So let me share with you how this idea came forward. The first country that had a Without Orphans initiative was Ukraine. And there were a small group of men and women, disciples, faith leaders, national leaders, praying regularly that God would have mercy and would save and rescue and provide safe and loving families for the orphans in orphanages in Ukraine about 15 years ago. And as they were praying, the person who actually is now the president's advisor on children's affairs found himself praying, Lord, would you please give us a Ukraine without orphans? And he was kind of shocked because it was one of those things that escaped, but he had not intended to pray it, or nor had he ever thought of it.
Yeah.
But they all stopped the prayer meeting to begin to have a discussion about, would this be possible? And it seems like God is inviting us to believe it could be, and what would that look like?
Yeah.
And they realized that there were 30,000 adoptable children in orphanages and that there were 30,000 churches. So they felt invited really by the Lord to start a one church, one orphan campaign. And within about 15 years, the church adopted or fostered 80% of those 30,000. So then God began to show, like, if he can do that in one country, he can do it in many. And we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about what We're Without Orphans is focusing on. But we definitely care a lot about the children in institutions. We care a lot about those who are not in institutions, but they've had one or both parents die. So a bit more of the orphan status point of view. And we care about those who maybe have an orphan heart or an orphan spirit and that are horribly abused. We know that those numbers are tragically high around the world. So I care about all of those. And so World Without Orphans, as a movement and as an organization, we seek to call and equip the national leaders in the countries to collaborate to solve their own country's orphan and vulnerable children's crisis. Yeah. Now, this is rather unique among international organizations because so many of them have as their aim to keep the organizations strong. I would say our singular aim and joy is to serve national leaders and really lift them up to be able to walk forward and lead their nations in a sustainable way to where God is wanting to lead their nations.
It's beautiful. It's a privilege to be part of the team with you, Susan, and thank you for what you do. Now, right now, given that World Without Orphans we've been working hard at this and seeing some pretty astounding results across the nations with the number of countries that have started WWO initiatives, and both regional and national initiatives has been beautiful. And to meet those people around the world who are doing things at a grassroots level, that's been, for me, one of the greatest prizes, to see the beauty and the quality of God's people who just genuinely care about young people. And but right now, the whole world is going through this unprecedented time of COVID-19. Can you tell us a little bit about, just because I know that you know some of these statistics on a global level, how is COVID-19 and this crisis impacting children?
So, Greg, thank you so much for asking. I mentioned all three of those categories of children who are orphaned and vulnerable, and it actually is increasing the numbers and the severity of every one of those three categories. So let me say a little bit about that. Because of the worldwide tendencies toward decreasing the size, the numbers of people who can gather in one place, we certainly know it's affected our churches, but we also know it's affected schools because schools have closed in the United States. What many people are unaware of is that over 1.5 billion of the children who are school age and enrolled are currently out of school and at home. That's 91% of the world's children in 191 countries. We also know from what first started happening in Wuhan, the epicenter of the epidemic in China, that they recognized at the height of that epidemic a threefold increase in police reports of domestic violence in the month of February 2020, just 2 months ago, compared to February 2019, the previous year. And just 5 days ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the whole United Nations, announced that he is calling for urgent prioritization in every country that's responding to COVID on the impact this is having on children.
Yeah.
Because there are going to be more children orphaned
Yeah.
as their parents die, one or both parents die.
Mm.
The children that were in institutions because of these rules against mass gatherings, many institutions are summarily closing and just letting the children go somewhere, like back home or into the community, without really knowing and having careful attention being devoted to, are they going to be safe? And then the third category, violence, I was just talking about that, dramatic increases. We do know from the Ebola crisis, I was also deployed as an officer in the public health service to work on the Ebola crisis at the height of it in Sierra Leone and in Liberia. And we saw in Sierra Leone, 70% of the teenage girls out of school at increased risk of adolescent pregnancy because they were having unprotected sex, often rape. And we saw 30% reported sexual exploitation. This was in a well-designed, systematic survey implemented by a very highly trained organization that is reputable and respected in this area, Plan International. So we are very concerned about the impact that this can have on children.
Yeah.
Not only are, I think, we in WHO concerned about it, but for the Secretary General of the United Nations to have a speech on it on April 5th that anybody can clearly access online. He is very concerned. And in fact, he mentions all three of those categories that we are dealing with.
Well, you know, it's shocking to me. That's one of the things that when you first mentioned that really got into my heart, because I suddenly realized for a lot of people, this is a you know, everybody's coming into the home, and there's a lot of positive aspects to that. Families can spend time together. But the downside of that is that if they don't have healthy family dynamics, if there is a pattern of violence or addiction, the children are probably the ones that get the really rough end of this, and so that was a big concern for us. You know, we suddenly realized, you know, for those of us who care about children and who've been working in this field to try and help in these three categories, suddenly we realized there's a crisis right now. The pressure, somebody just turned on a pressure cooker in millions of homes, and children are exceptionally vulnerable right at this stage. And so, can you then just outline, given that that's the reality we're facing, can you just outline a little bit about what WWO has done, just in a very quick kind of response to we need to do something right now to help those children?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we do have 6 regions of the world that we have prioritized. Every world region, really, we are working with. And in each of those world regions, we have 2 to 3 regional ambassadors. We have very quickly been able to implement Zoom technology interactions with them in a way that we had not before. So we are involved in weekly prayer meetings and discussions with them, and even training with them about how we can best serve them in the situations in which they find themselves. So it's fascinating, some of the things that we're learning. So I'll give you 3 examples. The leader of Croatia Without Orphans is a pastor, and he ended up in his church when lockdown was announced and the police were strictly enforcing it. They would not let him leave. He just had to stay there, and people were bringing food around wherever he were. So he was in the church 6 days at one of our first meetings, but he was able to have his, Skype call, Zoom call, and they had just had a 6.4 earthquake on the Richter scale in Zagreb, additionally. And so this pastor, who's locked out away from his family in the middle of an earthquake, says to us, "The one who has hope shall lead. And we, of all people, are carrying hope." So if I had to say what is happening, we're seeing that our World Without Orphans regional ambassadors are increasing the ones in the nation, like Croatia, but those in the nation are increasing all the other ambassadors and the other national leaders. Because we have the WWO roadmap, which is right here, which is the world's best available evidence and practices to address 4 priorities, and they're shown here in this beautiful flower icon. But the 4 priorities are living refreshed, keeping our own walks with the Lord vibrant and real and daily, hearing his voice, seeing what Jesus is doing, loving the way Jesus is loving, living refreshed. Number 2, collaborating broadly across governments and businesses and donors and churches and other faiths. Number 3, really emphasizing effective approaches to intervening to help children who, like all the ones that have just been released from the orphanage. And number 4, really catalyzing and expanding our efforts towards prevention of violence. So those 4 priorities are ones that we are addressing in these weekly calls that we're having with the regional ambassadors. And just as an example, another example besides the Croatian one, we have been able, through my co-authoring that paper in the Lancet that you mentioned, we have taken the world's most effective parenting program in the world, the only one recommended by the World Health Organization that is the same one in our roadmap, and our global experts between World Health Organization, UNICEF, CDC, and others, we have taken that and we have condensed it into 6 one-page parenting tips that are interactive and help parents know this is how you can parent your child well. This is how you can get relief from your own stress. This is what you can do if you feel angry or like you're losing control. This is what you can tell your children about COVID-19, for example. So we are able to take those, and our WWO leaders translated half of the ones that have been translated into about 50 languages. And so now WWO is the only international organization that has been given permission to put the WWO logo on the upper right-hand corner of it on the same, graphic that is created by UNICEF, WHO, and CDC. So it's just phenomenal. And so the resources that we have and the training that people like me and others can provide for them are unparalleled and specific to COVID-19. And because we've been able to pull them in the translation, they became very familiar with the content, and they're using it in their own families. And so, for example, I just got news from the Christian leader in Sri Lanka. By the way, Sri Lanka is a Buddhist country, 70% Buddhist. The government is asking the Christian leaders of Sri Lanka without orphans, we need you to help us respond to this coronavirus crisis in distributing food, helping people avoid mass gatherings, helping them stay safe and social distance. But we also need you to help us deal with the violence. And they said, oh, perfect. We have exactly what the World Health Organization and CDC recommend. We've already translated into Tamil and Sinhalese, the 2 languages in the country. And we know a lot of the country doesn't have internet, but we have churches throughout every one of the 9 regions of the country. We will distribute it with the food in the food packets and print it. So that's just an example there. Zimbabwe, I'm just getting an email over the weekend from our World Without Orphans leader in Zimbabwe. Susan, Zimbabwe, the economy was falling apart before coronavirus. We were having high levels of food insecurity. The food insecurity is worsened. We are beginning to distribute food in collaboration with the government, but the violence is off the charts. We are wanting to go ahead and take these. Can you tell us if they're in Shona, which is the main language we need? And they are. They're in Shona, the main language they need. So it's just an example of how suddenly all of the people that had been leading in World Without Orphans and the World Without Orphans at the national level are being sought after by their governments. And they need increased resources, increased training, but they also need shepherding and mentoring because it is a war they are in, I think, more than even it is a war that we are in.
Yeah. I mean, I think since the forum last year in October, where we had 500 global leaders come together to address some of our cares and concerns, and we introduced this roadmap and with the 4 specific initiatives, but the broad scale collaboration is one of the things that we're passionate about, because we have to do this. If we're going to have a world without orphans, we have to collaborate across many spheres and specters. And then the intervention, when we see children we need to intervene, then the moment you involve yourself with intervention for a little while, you realize, what would it be like? We should invest further upstream. We should prevent this before it happens. And so prevention becomes a big deal. And then we realize, with the people on the ground who are working and pouring out their lives on behalf of children, we realized that they need to be refreshed. And so we created this Living Refreshed. So the broad scale collaboration, the prevention, the intervention, and the Living Refreshed aspects come together in a remarkable roadmap that I think is fast becoming a global leader in actually helping. And I'm just so thankful to you for driving us there, and appreciative of all the organizations that allowed us to use that hard-earned and well-written material, some of the world's best, and put it together in a roadmap that can be useful. I know the people sitting out there who are just going, I would love to get hold of those parenting tips. And so what we're going to do at the end of this program, we'll just put up a slide that'll have all the details for everybody about where you can get those parenting tips for you or for your church or for your organization, because it really will help you. And then I think I'm pretty sure there's some people sitting there, because they're sitting at home going, I would like to help. What can I do? How can I give? What can I do to support and make a difference?
Well, I would love to talk a little bit about that. It's fascinating because I will share with you two things that I really sense the Lord has said about this in this helping area. And the first is, the church is the answer to the virus and the violence. Yeah. And if the church is going to be the answer, then the Lord is inviting us to contribute practically in terms of our praying, in terms of financial generosity, and in terms of asking God, is there a child in my family or in my community that I'm worried about that I can go check up on? There certainly are some of those that Brian and I know about, and we've been checking on them here and praying around the world, and also been able to have some resources to give generously. So I'm inviting you to also do what we have been really blessed by. So that's one. The church is the answer to the virus and the violence. But number two, when I first learned that so many orphanages in so many countries, Kenya, Ukraine, Uganda, for example, are shutting down without there really being attention to the safety of the children,
time for them to plan. They just shut
down. It was really disturbing. And a good friend of mine, who is one of the world's experts in this area, said, Susan, you have to realize, as the world is shutting down, the church is stepping up. So I'm going to give you some opportunities for how you could step up and help. So certainly we would love for you to access these parenting tips, pray about how you could distribute them in your networks, in your churches. And many of you have global networks, and they are available in many languages. So you could also share them there. We would also really love for you, as you're even looking at the parenting page and seeing those tips, to pray that children are safe in families. Because again, we have never had 91% of the world's children out of school at the same time with an indefinite prediction about when they'll be able to return, and uncertainty about their safety. So prayerfulness is number one. Number two, we urgently need, or World Without Orphans urgently needs, about $127,000 to help raise awareness among the regional ambassadors, the national leaders, regarding how we really can prevent this, and what do you do to keep yourself safe if you think someone may have it, and also raising awareness about how ubiquitous this the consequences are going to be for all of those three categories of children that we were talking about. We also really need and are committed to training and supporting leaders. We actually have daily Zoom calls going on with almost every world region, with one of our expert trainers that for now is doing some volunteering, because it's just an emergency everywhere. And so much of what our leaders need is more training in crisis intervention and resilience. And what do you do when all the child protection workers are told stay at home, and you can only check on a family that might be abusing a child by telephone? I mean, it's an unprecedented time, and the need is great. And there's some real opportunities for models that are promising that involve the church. But then the final thing we want to do is fully build out an interactive portion of the WWO website that would promote best practices. But everyone is really inundated with all these web resources. So we don't want only the resources, but we want the resources connected with coaches who can interact with the people who need them and are using them to help them feel supported and help them implement them effectively for the benefit of children.
So at the end of this, we're going to put up a slide that has the details of where people can access the resources. There'll be an opportunity to, if you would like to make a contribution, which is going to go directly to the children and around the world. One of the things that I've been most impressed with as a group of people is that we tend to do the last mile really well. The people on the ground, the people making a difference. As we call and equip national leaders, and they have networks, and one of the things that I've been just amazed with at the beauty of the hearts of the people, it's typically people who feel a call to look after children. That is a calling on their lives, and so those people are not motivated necessarily by the same things many other people are. It's just something that sits on their life as a calling, and those are the kinds of people we're dealing with. They're just in it for life, and they're caring for young people. And so it's been remarkable to me to watch how we get to the grassroots at an amazing speed. And so I'm just really grateful to you. Susan, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for being with us. We deeply appreciate you, and we're trusting God that WWO can take off and that we raise this money pretty soon. And we're asking everybody then thirdly to join us in prayer for children the world over. Make a difference to a child in your life. Reach out to them, love them, pray for them, do what you can. Because if we can prevent more violence against children, what a better place this world would be. And we're trusting for a brighter future than the one we were handed. Susan, I appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. And thank all of you who are listening in. If you have any more questions, you can definitely, through the links on that website, get us, or even through North Church. That's where I go. People know how to find me. And I just want to thank you, Lord, for everyone who's listened. And Lord, I pray your greatest blessings on all of them and all of us as we seek to serve you well in these unprecedented times. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.